my life with Tourette syndrome is only going to get somebody so far. Like if somebody doesn't relate to my experience with Tourette syndrome, then that's not going to help them. It might say, oh, hey, a person with Tourette syndrome, cool, whatever. But if your story can relate to so many different people, especially being diagnosed later too.
Yeah.
That's way out of my realm too. Because for me, all I've ever known was Tourette syndrome. And you might have as well. You just didn't, I guess you didn't realize. You said looking back, there was things you saw that.
It wasn't weird to me, but looking back, I can be like, okay, we can kind of look at it and be like, those were probably tics. At the time, it didn't really affect me. Like I wasn't bothered by it, and I didn't really notice it.
Yeah.
But my mom says, like looking back, she's like, those were probably tics.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like I lived 16 years of my life without it, and then at 16, it kind of came out, and
yeah,
so it's been very different because it's like I know what life used to be like before I had these tics.
Yeah, and I can't imagine that being obviously an easy thing, because you saying that I feel like gave me chills. Like I knew it for 16 years. I knew what it was like to not be like this.
Yeah.
And to just wake up one day and it basically just be there, whether you always technically had it or not.
Yeah, but that level it wasn't there to that level.
Right. So you basically didn't have it. And so it was stuff that you could probably pass off as like,
oh yeah, people just thought, oh, well, you're sick or you have like pink eye or whatever.
Yeah.
It wasn't like a big deal, but now it's like, okay, you can't, why are you doing that?
Yeah. Like, all right, it's not just a little tickle in your throat this time. Yeah. So I get that. That part's very interesting to me. So were you ever, I know it can be a touchy subject for people too. I was only ever on medication when I was in college. Have you ever, or do you take any medication for it now, or do you just kind of let it run its course? And if you don't want to talk about it, again, completely fine.
I've only ever taken one medication for it, and it worked okay, but I had a lot of side effects. And so I ended up stopping it. I already take medication for other mental health issues.
Yeah.
I guess for me personally, I've learned to deal with it. Mm-hmm. And I have my own coping skills that don't involve medication, that I don't feel like I need medication to function every day. Now, if like it got to a point, like I definitely have days where it's like bad, I'm having tic attacks and things like that. Or I definitely will have like weeks, like definitely during like Christmas time, it was quite bad.
Yeah, I know how that is. Definitely.
Yeah. But I just personally don't want to take medication for it now. Like in the future, if it was if I was having tic attacks like every day, I would take medication. But for now, I feel like I can function fine without it.
Yeah, so. Definitely. I agree on that. That's exactly how I am as well. I'm hoping that it won't come to a point in my life where I need it again.
Yeah.
College was just a lot for me, as it is for anybody, but I was going to college. I was working full time. I was planning a wedding. Then we decided to buy a house. So put it all on myself, probably, really. But there was so much happening at once. I was upping my medication, I think, almost every semester.
Oh, wow.
And then when I stopped, and this is bad and I shouldn't have, but like I was done. I was getting ready to graduate. I'm like, all right, well, then I'm done. I'm just not going to take it anymore, which is not the right way for anybody watching. It's not what I should have done at all. I should have weaned myself off. Yes. But like you said, like the side effects often aren't even worth the relief of tics, if it even helps. Because I think a lot of people are like, well, can't you just take a medicine for it? They don't realize that there's no medicine that exists that's specifically for Tourette syndrome.
Oh, yeah. And that's the hard part, is that it's always to treat something else. It just happens to treat tics.
Yes.
So to me, that also, my mom was kind of like, when she found that out, she was like, well, that made her a little nervous, because she's like, since it's not specifically designed for tics, like what other things could happen when you take it?
Yeah. And that's a very frightening thing.
Tired. So I was sleeping all the time. Like I was sleeping in school. Like I would go to school and then be sleeping during school. I would come home and sleep. Like it wasn't worth it. And I probably wasn't ticking because I was sleeping all the time, thinking about it.
Yeah, that's how it worked. So if you're sleeping, then you're fine.
Yes.
Yeah, I definitely understand that. So what kind of coping mechanisms have you found to help your Tourette's? Is there anything that you found that like brings you into like a world of like no tics whatsoever? Because I know some people, I know for me growing up dancing, like that was like where I just never ticked. It was my safe spot, where now I don't dance anymore. because I'm 31 and my knees can't handle it. But when I exercise, it reduces them. And I notice if I consistently exercise, at least my tics are kind of laid back throughout the week as well, because that energy is getting out in some way. Have you found anything like that to help you?
Well, exercise definitely helps me in a lot of ways, like helping sleep better, but also like when I exercise, my tics are pretty calm. And then usually for about the hour after I exercise, my tics also calm down as well. Knitting also is really helpful for me. I don't like completely stop ticking when I knit, but it's like definitely a lot calmer. Like it's usually only like facial tics. Because I'm focused on knitting. Those are like the two big ones, but also sometimes listening to music can help. Like sometimes if I'm having that tick day, but I need to go out and do something, I'll just have like listen to music in one earbud and like walk around and shop, and that helps me from like having really intense tics while I'm out.
Okay.
So things like that really help me.
Good. Yeah. I'm always fascinated by people that can knit, because I can't sew, I can't knit. I learned how to crochet when I was younger. My grandma taught me, but all I could do was make one like long string, basically. And so that's just what I kept doing. I made the longest string ever because I couldn't get it to keep going. And maybe it's just that I didn't give it enough effort. That's probably what it is. So my husband, I always joke with my husband that I'm really like 85 on the inside. Like I'm just like this old lady. And he's like, well, then you might as well just start knitting, because he's like, you're already halfway there. I'm like, hey, I would gladly learn how to knit. I can make my own hats, my own scarves.
Oh yeah. I can only make scarves. I'm slowly learning how to make hats.
Okay.
That's a whole different stitch. I only know how to do the knit stitch. I don't know how to do any other ones. I've watched videos and I'm like, oh gosh, like I can't do that. Like I can't do that. I can barely do the knit stitch. I learned at the beginning of quarantine actually.
Oh, nice.
Online school was, kind of boring. And I was like, let me do something. So I learned how to knit. It took me about 2 weeks to actually get it together, because my first couple projects kind of fell apart. But after 2 weeks, it was like, all right, I've got it.
Yeah, that's really awesome. That's what I always like, not for knitting, but even just for like sewing. So like if a button like falls off, or I'm a very short person. So I always just tell myself, I just need to learn how to like hem the bottom of my pants or something that's too long. And I'll watch a video and I'm like, all right, I can do that. That seemed easy enough. And then I go to do it. I'm like, I have no idea whatever I just watched. It's completely gone. I have no idea what I'm doing. So if a button ever falls off, I sew it back on, but it's really just going in a bunch of loops and hoping.
You're just like, all right, let me just.
I'm just like, we'll see how long this lasts, because every once in a while, Scott, my husband, will be like, you know how to sew? I'm like, not for real.
I'm like, I can pretend so.
Yeah. I'm like, what do you need done? I'm like, if you only need it for a one-time thing, I could probably make it stay. But honestly, you could do just as well as I can at this point, because I don't know what I'm doing. I always brought it to my grandma if I needed pants hemmed, or now I just deal with it.
Yeah, my grandmother, when I was younger, she's like a master at sewing. She's very crafty. So when I was younger, if I ever had a button fall off, I was like, Grandma, you can do this. And she would.
Yep.
So
my grandma as well, she's very, very crafty as well.
I never needed to learn how to sew because she could just fix my things. Now at this point, I need to learn how to sew. But
that's how I feel. I'm like, all right, I need to learn how to do this, even just little things like a button falling off, so it actually stays. So when I wash it the next time, it's not at the bottom of the washer because it fell off the very first time. That's generally how it is now. Or like I always so when I make, because I like to consider myself a decently crafty person, not with sewing or knitting or anything, but I like to make things, and I like to, if I see something, I'm like, well, I can do that on my own. I don't need to pay for it, type of thing. Or like for Halloween costumes and stuff, I always just I'm like, well, I'll just get some fabric glue instead. Why try to learn how to sew it? I can just fabric glue it on or hot glue it, and
exactly,
it's much easier. Unfortunately, it doesn't work for buttons, so at least I don't think. I've never tried it.
Not as well as you would think it would. Not as well as you think it would.
Yeah, I guess it probably wouldn't move enough to.
Oh yeah, and then you end up ripping it off anyway.
Yeah, so. The buttonhole probably wouldn't work out at all. That's funny. So, I think for the most part, I have asked the questions on my notes. Is there anything else that you want to make sure that we talk about or any? Oh, no, I didn't. Sorry. One other thing is that you were or are a rising leader for the Tourette Syndrome Association, right?
I'm actually a youth ambassador because I
Youth
was trained when I
ambassador.
was 17.
Okay. I wanted to
Yeah.
make sure we talked about that. So how did that come into play and what do you do as a youth ambassador for the association?
It was luck because during the process of getting diagnosed, I was just like looking up stuff about Tourette syndrome because I was like, okay, what's going on with me? And then I came across the Tourette Association of America, and I was like, huh. And I just started reading through their stuff, and it was kind of like, oh, this youth ambassador thing seems really cool. And the day, the day it was due, I filled it out.
Oh
I was
man.
like, I'm probably not gonna get in whatever. Did the interview over the phone, was like, I probably did a terrible job. Then I got an email saying, you got accepted. And I was like, oh, like not that I didn't want to get accepted, but I really didn't expect to.
Right.
Like, oh, it'll be cool, but whatever. But I did. And then I went down to Florida and got trained. And that was amazing.
I bet. Was it the first time you were around a bunch of people or more than yourself with Tourette syndrome?
Like I'd never been around anyone else with Tourette syndrome. I'd never really talked to anyone else with Tourette syndrome. And so it was kind of like, wow, I'm really not alone. Like there's other people who experience the same thing I do. And I was like talking to them and like sharing similar experiences. It was like, oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, that's really cool that they do that. I always am just hoping and waiting. I'm like, all right, do something for adults that aren't that are 30 and above, please. I would like to do it.
One day we'll make it happen.
Yes, definitely. I'll create it on my own, I guess. So would you then would you suggest that for other people like around your age to do it? Like would that be something you would encourage? Is the word.
Oh, definitely. Because you learn a lot of skills and you learn a lot about Tourette syndrome. Even though like I knew a bit, it was like I learned even more.
Yeah.
And I learned how to do the presentations. So as a youth ambassador, you give presentations to the community. You can do it to schools, to churches, to businesses about Tourette syndrome. And that was a really cool experience because I've done, I think 3 or 4, and they've been really great. I always walk away being like, that's nice.
Yeah, that's really amazing.
And I feel like, you know, if I ever went to those places, it's like at least some people there would have an awareness.
Yeah, absolutely. You got your diagnosis and you just like jumped right in then to advocacy.
Yes, because during that process, I had some bad experiences that drove me to kind of do it.
Okay.
So yeah, the one that really sticks out was when I was hanging out with a friend and we went to like this little, I don't know, like a park area. Like there's a park and like a basketball court, and it's just kind of an area that like a lot of people hang out. And I was ticking pretty bad, and I had this lady like yell at me, and she was just like, "You need to stop that!" Like yada yada yada. And she was there with her son, and I was like, "I'm sorry, like it's Tourette syndrome. Like this is what it is." And she's like, "You want to be a bad teenager?" Like yada yada yada. And it was just really embarrassing because up until that point, I never had experience like that. So I ended up just like going home. And I was just really upset. I was like,
yeah.
And then also just like, I also had like a couple people like confront me in stores about it. And so it's just like, I wanted to have the tools to kind of combat that, because up until that point, I would kind of not say anything and just be like, okay. But like now I'm like, no, like I have to this is what it is. And I'm not really going to let you treat me like that. So.
Right. And that's exactly how it should. So, cause that sounds like it helped you like make sure your narrative was told like your way. You weren't allowing somebody to be like, I was just this bad teenager or whatever. Cause people are so quick to judge that. I know that a lot of people think people with Tourette syndrome are on drugs or something because they've never seen anything like it before. It's hard. And that's what's frustrating to me too with it just being represented as a joke or whatever, because at that point they can accept it and laugh at it when they're watching that movie, but then they're out there and they see somebody that's really like it. They're like, no, that's not real.
Yeah.
And it makes it hard. It makes it seem like Tourette syndrome for one isn't real at all, but then you see a real person and all of a sudden, well, it's not funny. It makes me uncomfortable. So it can't be real. Like you have to stop. And it just makes me so mad. Well, I'm glad that you're youth ambassador, right?
Yes.
Okay, I almost said rising leader again, and I know that's the different age
Next
group.
year. Next year.
Okay, so the youth ambassadors first, and then the rising leaders after that.
Yeah, but I think you can apply to be a rising leader without having been a youth ambassador. You just have to be between 18 and 25.
Okay. All right.
So I can apply this year, but I'm just gonna wait a year because I would like to do it in person if possible.
Yeah, definitely makes a difference. That's for sure. Yeah. I'm sure, especially when half the experience is being able to be around people like you.
Oh yeah. Even though after training I was so tired because I was like taking every 5 seconds. I was
yeah. Did you come back with any new tics because of being around people ticking?
I don't think so. I know when I went to National Advocacy Day in 2020, I definitely came back with some new tics.
Yeah.
I think when I was trained, I don't think I did. But National Advocacy Day, I definitely picked some up.
Yeah, that's when it's down in DC, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I've always wanted to go, and I never think about it ahead of time enough to get time off and like plan for it.
Oh yeah.
And then it comes up, and I'm like, man, again, why didn't I go? I would love to do it one of these years. Maybe not this year. Who knows where all this COVID mess will be by then. So
it's virtual this year. So I'm doing it this year, but it's virtual, which will be interesting. I'm curious to see how it'll play out, but I'm excited still.
Yeah.
It was still really awesome to do it last year, so I'm thinking it'll still be awesome this year.
Yeah, definitely. Well, maybe this will be my chance then. Maybe I should look into it since it's virtual. I don't have to actually travel there. Yeah, even though it'd be nice because I've never been to DC or anything. I've been.
Really?
Yeah.
So DC is like. I mean, I understand people think it's cool, but I went there so much as a kid that now I'm just DC.
Yeah, and I think I'm similar, but not because I haven't been there. But I like my husband and I love traveling, but we're both kind of the same. We're like, well, I like to travel, but I don't do it to see like history stuff.
Oh no. Not usually.
Yeah, I'm just like, it's not really my thing, and I feel bad saying that sometimes, but I'm just like, well,
like I want the experience.
Yes.
And food and that. Like I'm not really. I have people in my family who are like history buffs, but like I'm not, no.
Yeah. Either I'm not gonna. I want to go see it, obviously, and experience it, but I'm not gonna make like the whole trip like even if it wasn't DC, but somewhere else, but maybe it's like enriched in history. My whole trip's not going to be centered around that.
Oh yeah. I mean, I
guess depending on what it is, I suppose. I guess I can't say. We do want to eventually go to all 50 states. So eventually, like we're going to find something, and we're very far from it. So, but there's definitely time. But we have like a travel bucket list or whatever. But yeah, like I'll hear people, they're like, I want to go here to see all these museums and all this stuff. I'm like, I don't want to do any of that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that really was my last question, as I have my notes pulled up on my other screen over here. That's why I'm looking over here. So again, before we say our goodbyes or anything, was there anything that I didn't touch base on that you want to make sure is talked about, or anything else that you want to say about your life with Tourette syndrome or anything?
I will just say that if other people are getting diagnosed in life later, it gets easier, definitely. Like compared to when it first started to now, my tics kind of feel like second nature, which is weird. Like, I guess I've definitely gotten used to most of them, except when I get like a new one or I have a really loud one. I'm just like, okay, like, no. Most of them, it's like, oh, well, sometimes I don't always notice I'm doing them. Like my mom, like I'll be making a lot of facial tics and eye tics. Like some of those I don't always notice. And my mom will be like watching me. And I'm like, oh, I'm probably making a weird face. She's wondering why I'm doing that. So it definitely gets easier. And so I'll just say, you have to accept it. Because when I first got diagnosed, I was like, I could be sad about it all the time and angry, but I could also accept it and grow from it.
Yes.
Easier. And you also feel better about it, because if you're angry about it all the time, you become kind of bitter. So
Yes, definitely. And I agree. And I always say that too to people, like it's like when you get the diagnosis, you get handed two choices as well.
yeah.
Like to live with it. And I'm not saying you can't be angry and sad and
I am sometimes, but you don't want to live in that forever.
yeah, you don't want to live there. And that's what can be hard. And I think that's what people need to know, that also that's when it's okay to like reach out and see somebody, because there's that stigma around that too, that reaching out, admitting you need help. And I struggle with that too, admitting when I'm having a bad tic day, because I don't like to admit that they beat me, but you know, some days it just happens. So
often, like when I have tic attacks, I'll like try to hide out somewhere and like, because I don't want people to like see me. But at this point, my mom's like, you can always tell me and I'll like come sit with you and like, you know, try to calm me down. But I always get embarrassed because I'm like, I don't want you to like see me so upset.
Yeah.
But I've learned that like it's better to reach out, because number one, they tend to not last as long. And number two, it just feels better to not be going through it alone.
Yes. So. Absolutely. I think that is a great note to end on. Before we go, are there any social media handles or anything that you want to share for people to see and follow your journey with your advocacy and the ambassador program and everything?
So I have an Instagram. It's Chloe_Tic, and it's CHLOE_Tic, TIC. So yeah.
Okay.
Sometimes I post other shenanigans on there, but mostly it's about advocacy.
No, so Chloe_Tic for anybody that wants to follow your advocacy and your journey with Tourette syndrome, or anybody that has connected with your story, which I'm sure so many people will. Thank you so much for doing this. I'm so glad we finally got to do this and I got to learn about your story. It was definitely eye-opening for me as well. It gave me a whole new perspective on living with this disorder. So I thank you so much for being vulnerable and sharing it with me.
Well, thank you so much for having me.